What was going through your mind? Were you looking at the Jumbotron and you started to run out the tunnel, explain everything that was going on once you crossed the end zone?
I still don't know what just happened. I really don't.
Yes.
All I can say is give it to God, because without him, nothing is possible, and I wouldn't be here, so damn, that shit feel good.
It's been a terrible. It's been a horrible. It's been a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad 2 weeks for Jokes on You. Week 12, going into the Monday night games, down 91-85 to Plathanos. At the time, the lowest scoring team in the league. Joshua Dobbs and Cole Kmet versus Cairo Santo. When you have players on both sides of the ball, your chances of winning are that much higher. And when you have a quarterback, you assume that even with a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad performance, this quarterback at the very least would score 12, 14 points. Week 9, when he started with the Vikings, Joshua Dobbs, 24 points. Week 10, 24 points. Week 11, versus the Denver Broncos, 16 points. That night, collectively, from these two players, Pedro, unfortunately, only had 8 points by the end of the night, and Cairo Santo scored 13. Just last night, versus Team Bundy, in the driver's seat, 101-72 points. Pedro gets outscored 42-2, proving that ultimately the joke's on him. Oh, this is your Week 13 recap. Bundy here, you there, fresh off of a Monday Night Miracle. I believe this was my first of the season. I had no faith whatsoever in Jake Browning. And up until last night, to be frank with you, the NFL didn't have any faith in Jake Browning. I don't think the Bengals had any faith in Jake Browning. But, again, 42 collective points from Jamar Chase and Joe Mixon. Just 11 points from Kyler Murray, but Team Bundy gets the 114-103 victory nonetheless. Austin Ekeler, man, you know, there was some discussion in the chat about Austin Ekeler and CMC, and I had made the comments that I made. I said, all Austin Ekeler has to do from this point on is produce. And production for me from him at this point, considering what I'm going to be getting from Rachaad White and what I hope to continue to get from Joe Mixon, production for Austin Ekeler would at the very least be 11 points. Come on, break me off. This 1 point business is for the birds, dude. Like, I think he's injured. I think that's obvious. He got injured, I think, in week 1 or week 2. There's something wrong with Austin Ekeler. I don't know if it has to do with the contractual situation. Maybe he's lost confidence that the Chargers didn't pay him his money. But he gets 1 point. Go fuck yourself, Austin Ekeler. Hopefully you can get your shit together and at least give me a touchdown the next 3 or 4 weeks. It's possible. And on the other side, you had 22 points from James Conner, 17. I have no idea how that happened. It just came out of nowhere. I think at one point I looked at the fantasy football app and he had 6 points, and then all of a sudden he had like 12 and then 17. I was like, what the fuck? Pedro, what are you doing? But Team Bundy gets the Monday Night Miracle, and I think it was my first Monday Night Miracle of the year. I'm not quite sure. It feels good. God damn it, it feels good. I don't think there would have been much consequence had I lost. I think Hensel and I would have pretty much stayed in the same position. We'll get to the seeding and the playoff or the paths to the playoffs later. We're going to plow through these games, though. The very last thing that I'll say about this game, though, I'm very glad that I got the victory. I'm taking a look at Pedro's team here, and I see that he still has Joe Burrow on IR. And that makes me think that Pedro is going to select him as a keeper, which would surprise me if Pedro kept Joe Burrow instead of just drafting him next year, considering the fact that he has Isaiah Pacheco now, considering the fact that he has, I don't know, maybe Brandon Ayuk. It's a thought. But if we only get one keeper, I think so far on Pedro's team, Isaiah Pacheco would be the obvious selection. So I don't know why he has Joe Burrow on his bench. But we move on to the next game. Plathanos losing to Big Papa Pooh, 94-134. Big Papa Pooh walking away with the Kirk Cameron Award for Fantasy Excellence. I think he got it last week. I believe Jay got it last week. I'm not even going to check. 27 points for Dak Prescott, who is becoming the legitimate MVP candidate. I think he should win it, especially if Dallas goes into, I think they face Philadelphia next week. If they go into Philadelphia and they defeat them, I think Dak should walk away with the MVP. 22 points from Alvin Kamara, just 5 points from Zach Moss. Look, I hooped and I hollered. I said all this shit about Zach Moss, and you know where I stand. Regardless of the outcome, Zach Moss is a starter for you. Maybe this week, for week 14, you may start Zach Charbonnet because he scored 15 on your bench. But Zach Moss is still a viable starter, and that's the point. My final point in all this, and I feel like I have to continue to reiterate the nuance of my opinion, it's not about outcome. It's not about him scoring 15, 20 points. Eventually, he'll do that if Jonathan Taylor continues to be out for several weeks. But it's the simple fact that you've got a starter, my friend. You got a starter in exchange for someone who the other team will never start. Unless there is an injury to Mostert, unless there is another injury to Devin Achane, Williams Jr. will never start in this league, and that is ultimately my point. 20 points from Christian Watson, who seems to be coming alive, scoring 15 last week. Listen, he got a touchdown in week 11, and I think after week 11, Orlando dumped him because I figured, he was just saved by that performance with that touchdown. So he scored 8 in week 11, 15 last week with 94 yards, 71 yards this week with 7 catches, 2 touchdowns, 20 points for Christian Watson, who looks like Jay will be consistently starting, especially if Jordan Love produces like he continues to produce. It's going to be very interesting going here into the final few weeks. Damn, Orlando could have really used that. That's the shit, man. See, this is the abusive relationship with fantasy that we have. This is the abusive relationship. You dump someone, and then they turn around, and they all of a sudden start performing like you expected them to perform. It's heartbreaking. I laugh at a lot of things. I laugh at your injuries, mostly because you'll forget mine, but I don't laugh when you dump a player, and then he just turns around and becomes a stud, because it's happened to each of us a billion times. And to just see the way it's just, the process is just, it's happening for Orlando. It's so hurtful, especially Orlando needing points more than anyone at the moment. It's painful. Speaking of painful, Trevor Lawrence suffers an injury but manages to score 24 points for Hensel. I looked at the update, and it turns out that this isn't a serious injury. He probably will miss a few weeks. So Hensel may go into round 1 having to play some quarterback in the player pool, and considering the quarterbacks that were picked up for the bye this week, the quarterbacks on Ed's bench, me having Kyler Murray, other players, Paul having Tua, and having what's that other guy? The guy for the Chargers. A lot of quarterbacks are resting safely in people's benches, and Hensel's going to have to settle for a nothing in order to sustain for the final week and in round one. But let's see what happens. 11 points from David Montgomery, 13 from Tony Pollard, and finally a touchdown for Evan Ingram. So Big Papa Pooh gets the victory. And we move on to Skylander losing 116 to 132. Andy finally stringing along some real fantasy performances, but falling short to Joe, who stays in the playoff race. Listen, last week, I didn't give any thought into Joe's path because I figured Joe would probably lose and, just be the Joe of old. But Joe is showing himself to be resilient this year with a record of 5-8 now, keeping himself in the race. 132 points for him just last night, getting 13 points from Travis Etienne and getting 12 from McPherson. His kicker gave him the edge over Andy. Not much of a miracle, just a solid victory. As I said, if he had Etienne there, and Etienne was on the injury report, which is why I picked up the backup, Dearness Johnson. Etienne was on the injury report. If he would have played and Andy would have gotten the victory, come on. Andy admitted it himself. He took some oath. This is all part of the pact. We know, Andy. We know. At the Recap Center, we know what's going on in this league. 20 points from CeeDee Lamb. That combination of CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott is coming out of nowhere. 16 points from Michael Pittman Jr. Great trade between Joe and I. Last week, Michael Pittman Jr. got 10, Rachaad White got 11. This week, they both get 16. I'm happy. Joe's happy. He gets a legitimate wide receiver 2 to complement CeeDee Lamb. That, in my opinion, was one of the more efficient trades, one of the better trades this season. On the other side, 31 points from Deebo Samuel. That one of the runs that Deebo Samuel had, I think it was his second touchdown. That was just bully ball. He just bullied his way into the end zone. God damn it. 27 points from Tyreek Hill. Hopefully he gets injured at some point, Andy. What do you say? What do you think? Kyron Williams with 16. Just 12 from Patrick Mahomes. Look, Andy, I criticized you weeks ago for having no running game, and it seems like Kyron Williams is back, and he's giving you a legitimate running game, so that makes you a little bit more dangerous. We keep it real over here. But it seems like as that's happening, Patrick Mahomes' star seems like it's dimming down. It's dwindling. I don't know. I didn't expect him to get 12 points. Let's see what he's done over the past few weeks. Let's see. He had a bye week 10. Let's go back to week 8. He got 5. I think that was the game that you lost against me in week 8. He got 5, then 15, had the bye, 16, 19, 12. I won't even go through the effort of looking through all of this, but I'm pretty sure a lot of bum-ass quarterbacks have outscored Patrick Mahomes over the last month. Should Andy consider another quarterback? I don't think there's a better option out there, but I think his best bet is just to play Mahomes because eventually he'll pop and at least get 18 or 20 at some point. But he is no longer matchup proof. Against the Green Bay Packers here, just 12 points. So a disappointing performance for Andy. 22 points from Chuba Herbert on the bench. 19 from Puka Nacua because Keenan Allen didn't do shit with just 5 points. So Skylander gets his second loss of the season. So Andy, just know this. If Joe ends up making the playoffs, it was all made possible by you. Just remember that, Andy. Just remember that when you, whatever it is that you do for the NYPD, I don't know what you do. I think you probably do something shady. That's just my opinion, of course. The next game that we move on to here is Ewok Rape defeating Zach Wilson 109 260. Okay. Something that I found strange here. I guess looking back, it was strange. But when I looked through Ed's bench, I didn't really consider it that strange. So Sunday morning, Ed picked up the Ravens defense. So at least what that tells me is Ed's most likely not playing the Jets next week against his quarterback. We'll get to that later. But he didn't bother to switch out Justin Tucker for this game. Look, this wasn't really a game. Eric destroys Ed by 49 points. Maybe Ed figured he was going to lose, and since he's eliminated and Eric's already clinched, though now with this victory, Eric clinches the division and he gets the bye. Eric talking all this shit in the chat. Listen, you and Jay, because Jay had his comments on his one-man show the other day. You know, what did Jay say? Jay said, we missed the playoffs just last year, but we make it consistently. And then Eric jumps in the chat and he talks shit about me making, after 5 years. Guys, look, if I was stranded on an island after 2017, and it was just me and a soccer ball, and then I was rescued in 2023, just before the season started, and someone explained to me what happened in my absence. They said, listen, man, Andy won in 2019. Then he came back in 2021 and he won again. And it doesn't stop there. In 2022, he won his second in a row. My reaction to that would be like, Andy, you motherfucker. I'd sort of be like Denzel in Training Day when Jake shoots him in the ass. You motherfucker. Andy would be my mortal enemy because he finally did what I had teased the entire league for not being able to do for years. And that's tie with me. Meet me eye to eye, chip to chip at 3. That's what Andy did. I'd be pissed. I'd be so upset. I'd be fucking furious. And then I would ask, well, what else happened? And they told me, well, Eric won in 2020. I'd be like, oh, good for Eric. Right, good for Eric. That's good. Good for Eric. He's got 2. You got to win another, sir. You got to win another. And Jay, they wouldn't even tell me that you won shit. What was it? 2018, it was the commish. Then it was Eric. Then, then Andy did what he did. You haven't won anything. Jay hasn't won since 2014. Obama was president in 2014, nigga. So don't come over here with you. Look, listen, it's your right to clown me for not making the playoffs for 5 years. Because if either of you wouldn't have made the playoffs for 5 years, I'd be clowning you too. So that's okay. But on the other side of that, see, there's a part 2 to that. The part 2 is, what did you do in my absence? What did you do in my absence when I wasn't there? That's my question. If we were running a race and I just sat out for like 5 laps, did you pass me or are you still behind me? That's the question. But Ewok Rape wins 109-260. I'm so busy talking shit, I'm not even getting to the scores. 22 points from Mike Evans. Yeah, 22 points from fucking Mike Evans, dude. That trade just wasn't a good idea for Ed, especially now with the injury to Tank Dell. Not that it matters really because Ed is eliminated, but I still do think it'll be interesting to see what Ed does moving forward if he would select Tank Dell or Garrett Wilson, giving Garrett Wilson the benefit of the doubt with a better quarterback, maybe. Who knows? And just 9 points from Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp is looking sus as he was saved by that touchdown. Puka Nacua is looking like the wide receiver number 1, but Cooper Kupp may be in the same boat that Austin Eckler's in. They're probably playing injured. I don't think their best days are behind them. I still think that they can do what they've done in the past, maybe not exceed what they've done in the past, but do, numbers that are comparable to those numbers. But yeah, Ewok Rape wins, and he gets an injury to Ramondre Stevenson. We'll monitor that very closely. Hopefully he is done for a few weeks here. And the last game of the week is Ricky O losing to Pork Chop Express 58-95. This was the important game of the week. I told the commish, as all of you may remember, I told the commish, I had that thought just late at night. I said, has any team who received negative points from their defense, has any team gotten a victory this season? Turns out that no team got a victory with negative points. Though the commish answer to me hasn't aged well, considering that he comes back in the chat and he says, I looked into it myself, and it turns out that in those weeks, those teams that lost weren't necessarily the lowest scoring teams in the week. That's precisely what you were this week, sir, scoring 58 points, getting you your second Tito Award in 2 weeks. Last week's Tito Award was 89 points. I mean, it technically is a Tito Award, but all teams were playing, so Orlando just happened to be the lowest scoring team. But nonetheless, I mean, it's not a Tito Award in the sense of you get clowned. It's a Tito Award in the sense that you're just behind, and now this week you're really behind, scoring 58 points. You would have lost to a kickless Ed. Ed didn't have a kicker. You would lose to him this week. This was talk about terrible, horrible, no good, very bad game for DeAndre Swift, scoring 1 point. Devin Singletary, I guess the hype train on him has stopped, at least for 1 week, scoring 3 points. Josh Downs with 1 point. Orlando obviously decimated by the buys, not having Saquon Barkley, not having Stephon Diggs, Lamar Jackson, not having James Cook and Jordan Addison, and of course his tight end. 0 points from Cade Otton. Just an ugly performance here by Orlando, who is now in the passenger seat going into this playoff scenario in Week 14. Pork Chop Express, of course, now 6-7, 19 points from Tua, 17 from his Falcons defense against the Jets. I mean, that's the cheat code now. Whoever's against the Jets, just stream those teams, and you'll be sure to get a minimum of 14 to 15 points. I mean, this is ridiculous. 13 points from Courtland Sutton as well. So, yeah, that's how the cookie crumbles. So those were the scores for Week 13. So let's move on to the divisions, I guess, right? The WCW division has been officially locked up. It's been locked up since last week at 10-2-1. Guylander in the second slot. We've got Big Papa Pooh with 8-5. Then the meaningful teams, at least for Week 14, Pork Chop Express at 6-7. Joelicus Maximus at 5-8, and bringing up the rear is Ricky O with 5-8. The NWO division has been determined. It's over. The elimination of Jokes on You this week and the elimination of Zach Wilson the week prior has laid this division out for us, as Ewok Rape takes the division, so he will get the bye. With a record of 9-3-1, the Toronto Bundy with a record of 7-5-1, Plathanos at 6-6-1, 4-9 for Pedro, and 3-10 for Ed. Along with clinching the division, Eric has pretty much clinched the MVP award for this season, about 80 points. Let's see if I can do this here in real time. About 80 points ahead of Joe. 76 points ahead of Joe. It's not very likely that Joe is going to outscore Eric by 77 points this week. So Ewok Rape is, in my mind, officially the MVP for the 2023 season with 1335. Joelicus Maximus with 1259. Joe's scoring is very important for this week. Big Papa Pooh with 1257. Skylander with 1256. And with 1222. So these are the scenarios, man. The scenarios for this final week are very simple. Only 3 teams are alive for that very last playoff spot. And those teams are, of course, Joelicus Maximus, Porkchop Express, and Ricky O. Joelicus Maximus, with a record of 5-8, has the most points, of course, with 1259. He is 39 points ahead of Paul, who has 1220, who is 46 points ahead of Orlando with just 1174. The matchups, I mean, really the only game that matters here is Porkchop Express against the Toronto Bundy. And I say that because Orlando's got a pretty easy game against Zach Wilson. And it's an even easier game if Ed doesn't update his lineup, which hopefully Ed will update his fucking lineup, right? I mean, I'm assuming. When I saw that he didn't put Justin Tucker in, I said, okay, Ed's not putting in Justin Tucker. I looked at his bench. I said, Ed, I guess he doesn't want to drop all those players. He already thought he lost. He doesn't want to drop Brock Purdy. And, I'm okay with that because he drops Brock. Oh, my God. Listen, so much is riding on what Ed does this week as far as the waiver wire. In my opinion, will he make a waiver wire move? I don't know. But boy, it would be so hurtful. And you really have to start to question what the motive is if Ed drops Brock Purdy, right? Ahead of, I don't know, Taysom Hill, maybe Ed will put in Adam Thielen in place of Tank Dell, but it's the important game here is Porkchop Express against the Toronto Bundy. But the scenarios are as follows, okay? If all 3 teams lose, Paul will advance, right? It doesn't matter if Paul loses, he'll then go on to a record of 6-8. And the other 2 will, go on to a record of 5-9. Paul will advance into the playoffs. But if Paul wins, he is in. If Paul wins, he is in. That's why that win was so critical. It was so critical for Orlando to get that victory. If Paul wins, he is in. But if he loses with a Joe loss, he advances. Doesn't matter what Orlando does. Orlando's point total is so low that even if Paul loses and Joe loses, but Orlando wins, it's not very likely that Orlando's going to outscore Paul by 47 points. That's not very likely, especially with the point totals that Orlando has been putting up. But that's the scenario for Paul. If he loses, but Joe has to lose. Now, Joe's point total is very important, as I said, because he has 1259 and Paul has 1220. Now, we're going to move on to the needy teams, and that's Joe and Orlando. Joe needs a win and Paul to lose. Again, a victory from Orlando does not make a difference because Orlando is down 85 points to Joe. Not very likely that Joe wins and Orlando wins, but Orlando outscores Joe by, it's just as likely as Joe to overtake Eric for the MVP award. Orlando needs a win and both teams to lose. And he has to outscore Paul by 47 points. So needless to say, that Orlando's chances, even though ESPN, the percentages kind of surprised me here. ESPN has Orlando at, I thought it was flipped around. So Paul's chances of making the playoffs are 68%. Joel's percentage of making the playoffs is 25%, and Orlando is at 7. So those are the scenarios again. If all teams lose, Paul wins. If Paul wins, it's all over. If he beats Team Bundy, which lifetime, Team Bundy against Paul, he's got me 14 wins to 5. That including the win that he had just this year. And I also want to say that, I felt the need to tell Orlando this week that even though I want you out, and I have my reasons, and I'll get to those reasons once you're eliminated, even though I want you out, I'm going to do my absolute best to beat Paul, meaning I'm going to put in players that I would put in, if I was playing round 1, if I really wanted the victory. I'm not sitting people out. I'm not doing that. Last year, there was this talk. I'm not sure what the scenario was, but it was towards the end of the season. I believe Ed was eliminated again. Ed was eliminated, and I think somebody needed to beat Ed in order to eliminate me. And there was all this talk about, if Ed possibly sits his defense or sits some players, it would be funny because then Team Bundy would lose. Would Ed be that petty? I'm going to keep it real with you guys. When you guys were doing that, I said nothing. I just sat back and watched. Because had Ed done that, I would have voted to get Ed out of the league. I have no tolerance for that. Let me just tell you that. If I've never commented on that scenario from here till 20 years from now, if anyone intentionally sits players in order to fuck another team over, I vote to get you out of the league. Like, if I was commissioner, I mean, I think, 1 or 2 of you would have been out of this league, I think like 3 or 4 years ago. But if I was commissioner, I wouldn't stand for shit like that. I don't remember what the commission's stance was on that, but most of you were like, that'd be so funny if Ed did that. That'd be so funny if Ed did that. Thankfully, because Ed does have integrity when it comes to things like that, Take it from me. I know Ed, better than any of you, obviously, because Ed being the person that I knew and he came into this league, Ed has some integrity, even though he fucks around a lot. And ultimately, Ed did put players in the slots, and I think he lost anyway because it's Ed. But I have no fucking tolerance for shit like that. If anyone ever does that, sitting players intentionally just to fuck people over, nah, man, that's not cool. I want Orlando the fuck out of here. I don't want him in the playoffs. Gone. And it seems like most likely that's what's about to happen because he needs both of these teams to lose. I think Orlando's going to get the victory, but I don't know. Joe's got an easy path as well, though he has to get his quarterback from the player pool. But I think Joe's got a good matchup as well. But just the likelihood of Orlando outscoring Paul by, close to 50 points, it's just not going to happen. I want Orlando out of here, but I would never, ever, ever sit players just so Paul can win. That is so cowardly. It's so cowardly, and I wouldn't stand for it. I'd like to think that I have people in this league that agree with me as well. So the games here for Week 14 are Pork Chop Express going up against the Toronto Bundy, Ricky O against Zach Wilson, Jokes on You versus Joelicus Maximus. Look, with the luck that Pedro has had over the past 2 weeks, we can only assume that that Joe's going to do his thing and Joe's going to get a victory, and then we'll see what happens with Paul. Okay, and Big Papa Pooh against Ewok Rape. Now, another thing to note here is that seeding can still change. If Paul wins, he would move on to a record of 7-7, and Hensel loses, which this week he is likely to lose, going up against Guylander. And Hensel just so many. Let me see. No, Pedro's the one with all the buys. See, that's what's going to make this week difficult for Pedro. Pedro has so many buys to the Commander team. He has to make so many replacements. He's got to play players like Damian Pierce, who's been inconsistent. Jerome Ford, who's been, middle of the road, but at least he gets Josh Jacobs back. But it's going to be a difficult week for Pedro. Hensel is likely to lose. That would move Hensel on to a record of 6-7-1. Now, this would move Paul up to 5th place, moving him in the Andy bracket versus Team Bundy, and move Hensel down to the 6th seed to the Eric bracket. And of course, a Team Bundy win and a Jay loss, Jay going against Ewok Rape here in a likely round 2 matchup. A Bundy win, moving me to 8-5-1, and a Jay loss, moving him to 8-6, would move me up to the 3rd slot in the Eric bracket and moving Jay down to the 4th slot in the Andy bracket. So seeding is still pending here. Still a lot of shifts to be made here in week 14. But that's pretty much it, gentlemen. Paul wins, and he's in. They all fucking lose. Like dominoes, Paul still wins. Orlando needs so much to go in his favor that we can just about cancel the commish for 2023. What do you say? Anybody? Joe needs a win and a Paul loss. That's all. A win and a Paul loss. It's not likely that Paul is going to outscore Joe, especially in a loss, right? Joe being ahead of Paul by 39 points. Week 13 in the books. Pedro, the fantasy gods hate you. You're just going to have to make your peace with it and join the lottery. So, as always, may your quarterbacks get hurt before they leave the locker room. May your running backs pull their hamstrings. And may your wide receivers get arrested for marijuana possession. Go fuck yourselves.